good morning, and we should have our two. There we go, and I'll adjust. I wonder if there is a better that one. That one. I want to highlight them really. There we go, and try that one.
That's good.
Yes, there we are. Is a
Morning.
little experiment.
Morning, everyone.
What did you say, Richard?
I said good morning. It's a sort of traditional greeting in English. Before.
Yeah, but you're Cornish and Scottish, so what relevance is that to you?
Med in math.
I was thinking
that's Scots Gaelic for good morning.
That is Scots Gaelic for good morning.
Keith and Beth may have noticed the massive improvement in your appearance, Richard.
Well, one of the great advantages of where I was in Scotland is that they have a Turkish barber shop there. And I always quite like a Turkish barber shop. And the fellow cut my hair and did it properly. And also trimmed my beard and did that properly. So, yeah. So
he certainly did, that young Turk. He's done you proud.
No, yeah, and I gave him a proper tip. I said, go back to Turkey. No, I didn't.
What, on a horse?
Exactly. No. Keith, did you get to the... I'm just going to ask Keith whether he got to the open day at the court.
I did indeed, and it was not a huge success, I'm afraid. The front of house staff were very, very helpful. But yes. I sat in the White Hart and watched the queues, and it was obvious that if I took the Red Devil in, that I was going to cause absolute havoc, and the security people were very grateful for that. So I went and hoped in the hotel and got a walking stick that had been left in lost property, hobbled across the road and went in. And was merrily wandering around in various courts when the manager, who is very pleasant but very firm, came along and said, and she quoted a little thing to me, no doors, no floors, no docks, no rocks, no something of the sort, which actually left me with the option of shooting the ceiling, and I was not allowed into the basement, into the cells. So it was very limited, and I did enjoy it, but in terms of television, it was very limited. They all knew you too. I mean, you were a real passport in there. And I was very, very nicely treated, but it is full of steps. And sure enough, What did I do? I managed to catch my heel on a step, went arse over tip, and had first aid and so on fluffing around me. But I've learned how to fall, so I didn't hurt myself, except my pride, by God, and continued on my merry way. But I didn't spend as long as I thought I would there. But it is very well done, and your colleagues are to be congratulated. And one of the most popular things was dressing people up as a judge.
Yes. I think
That's
I know.
Because we're all transvestites.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. I think I probably know. I'm not going to say any name, but I'm fairly confident I know the manager you're talking about.
Thank you.
I would imagine Phil knows who she is.
Well, I know exactly who Keith is talking about, but as you never like names being mentioned, I won't mention her.
no.
You're
But-
a bit of a killjoy, Richard.
Yes.
Can I say 90% of the staff were really first class, though, and particularly the people at the front desk,
Oh yeah.
security. I turned up, and one chap who, and he said, I don't think you can bring a camera in. And the second chap came and said, oh, no, we know him. Come on in. And they were really very, very nice and very helpful. So when you're talking to people in there, will you pass on my congratulations that in the main, I was very impressed.
Yeah, certainly. No, I think the security of the people you're talking about at Lewis are best that I have come across. There are some courts where, dare I say it, at one time, Brighton Court had it's better now, but they had a terrible group of security staff. Whereas at Lewis, they're friendly, they get their job done, they're non-confrontational, but they just make sure that everything's safe, which is their job. I don't know what your experience was, Phil.
Identical to yours. I have always liked the security staff at Lewis. The head man, whose name I will mention, is Tyler, who is an excellent and incredibly responsible, still quite young man.
But has been there for years, in fact, oddly enough. He's been there for about 20 years now.
Yes, and he's the master of really funny jokes too, which is good.
He doesn't say
Brighton,
the same about you.
No, I know he doesn't, but Brighton is a hateful place. Up until the time I retired, I hated going there. You say it's got better. It's probably got better because it's no longer managed by that particular female.
Yes.
Who
I'm
was awful.
I'm confident that was one of the reasons. Anyway, Philip.
The subject of the day, Richard.
Could I just say, Richard,
yes.
I was in courtroom 3, I think it was, on the upper floor.
Yes.
And the thing that struck me was, having been in the Old Bailey 2 or 3 times, in a miniature sort of way, I was impressed is the wrong word, but amazed at how it replicated the Old Bailey courtroom. It was sort of a miniature of it.
Yes. Not as impressive as courts 1 and 2, of course, at Lewis, which are the old original courts.
Yeah.
Which are those are the courts that would meet your Judge John Deed's requirements, Keith.
Yes. I mean, lots of females.
Well, I'm not sure about that. Anyway, Philip, I think we've agreed we're going to talk today about something that's a bit topical and relates to the criminal justice system. And that is, amongst other things, that is escapes. And I just want to ask
from prisons.
From prisons, exactly. And I just wanted to invite you to give your take on what has happened in the last week or so at Wandsworth.
Well, we're referring to Mr. Khalife,
yes,
an ex-soldier who was on remand, in other words, was in custody, awaiting trial at Wandsworth Prison on charges of terrorism, which were bomb hoax affairs at military locations.
And just so we're clear, sorry, Phil, just so we're clear about that, on remand means you've not been convicted of anything, but you're deemed to be of sufficient danger in a range of ways that nevertheless you're kept in custody until your trial.
Correct. And as we all know, it's obvious with the help of others, and I'm going to cite another example that might interest you all in a minute. He strapped himself to the underside of wearing so that'd be blue trousers and a chef's white tunic top, and no doubt a hat as well. And he was driven to the Chiswick area, where he unstrapped himself and was seen to make off by at least two members of the public. He was then further seen in the oncoming days, dressed very differently, in very dark clothing with a dark baseball cap, carrying some sort of case. And then, as we know, he was finally apprehended by an undercover terrorism officer in plain clothes on the Thames Canal towpath in Chiswick. So he hadn't got very far. And he's now back in custody. The questions that arise are...
And has been charged with offences in relation to his escape from lawful custody. So
I was coming on to that, Richard, but yes, okay. You're quite right. Yep. So he's charged further with escape, and as you and I know, that will inevitably mean an added consecutive term if he is convicted or not of the terrorism offences.
So the position is that if he's convicted of the terrorism offences, he'll get time on top. That's what you mean by consecutive.
Yes, consecutive, yes.
Additional time. But even if he's acquitted in relation to the terrorism offences, he could still be convicted of the escape offence. And it seems to me that he's, as we lawyers say, he's banged to rights on that.
Yes, he's banged to rights on what he's called escape from lawful custody.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you're in the custody of a police officer or you're actually in prison. Lawful custody means exactly that, and there are various forms of it. The question is, he's called...
Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
We need to get our timing right, Richard, you know.
No, you need to stop talking for a minute.
Well, you carry on then.
Well, no, I was just going to say, in relation to lawful custody, an escape therefrom, there are various levels of it. But this would be, I'm sure, at the top end of the scale. Given
it's hard to imagine anything more serious as a form of it. You know, a calculated inside job.
Yeah, absolutely.
A rather flamboyant escape.
Yes.
I have read that when he was actually arrested, there were other people on the towpath, and all he did was laugh and wink at them.
Yes.
Because like all of these escapees, my research tells me they all, from their own memoirs and things, they all expect to be caught. It's the thrill of the chase that they rather like. And his demeanour on arrest, if accurately described, would rather suggest that was his state of mind.
Yeah.
What I was going to was a terrorist suspect who gets a job in the Category prison is unheard of. He should have been in Belmarsh Category A, which is a prison within a prison, because you and I have both visited there. And that, I'm confident, is where he'll end up now.
Oh, yes. You know, there are several questions that will need to be asked. Firstly, why wasn't he picked out earlier when he was in the army as being potentially a danger to the security of this country? Why wasn't the vetting properly done? Secondly, what on earth were Wandsworth doing, as you say, putting him in the kitchen? And
it's my theory, Richard, is that because he was an ex-squaddy, the warders would be favourable towards him. I don't know. That's pure speculation.
No, I can see that, and also it sounds like he's a person who could be very charming, but
yes,
might have a significantly darker side that he's able to hide away. But of course,
there is a precedent.
Yeah,
there is a precedent for this type of escape.
Tell us, Phil.
In 1950, a certain Riggs was serving in Wandsworth, and he met one of the soon-to-be fellow Great Train robbers, Bruce Reynolds, who was on a separate sentence. And they helped a well-known thief and safe-breaker called Ted Blair escape in this way. In those days, the cons in Wandsworth would make kindling wood, which was supplied to government properties and offices, because in those days it was all coal fires and whatever else. And what Ted Blair did, with Biggs and Reynolds' help, was strap himself under a van, delivering kindling, and wait for this, to the Home Office. And that's where they dropped Ted Blair off. So this escaping prisoner, helped by Biggs and Reynolds, was just dropped off at the Home Office.
And of course,
under the van, and he was on the run for quite a long time.
And of course, Ronnie Biggs, who did become a minor part of the train robbery team, a rather ineffectual one, as I understand it. He himself escaped from prison, and
indeed he did, and he was given 30 years. As part of the gang. As you say, he played a much lesser role than the public myth believes.
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah.
But he'd served 15 months of his sentence again at Wandsworth, and he and 3 others scaled, with the help of other cons in the exercise yard. 4 of them scaled a 20-foot wall, and as we know, he ended up in Brazil.
Well, he went around the world a bit, didn't he? He was in Australia for a while. He had his family there. Then off to Brazil, got a woman pregnant there in order to prevent his extradition. Jack Slipper, who was the policeman who was trying to catch him, effectively had a nervous breakdown when he wasn't able to get him back here. And Ronnie spent a very long time, and it was only when his health failed that he agreed to come back to this country. And just on that, oddly enough, on that, people might remember the film Buster, which was about one of the other train robbers.
The flower seller.
And exactly that. And I, 25 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, bought a bunch of flowers for my then girlfriend, now wife, from Buster. And he was the most miserable.
Who was that? Was it Waterloo Station was his stall?
Waterloo Station. It was just under the the bridge there that he had his store.
Yeah.
But he was
as you say, Biggs voluntarily returned because he was terminally ill, and he died back in Britain in 2013.
He I think his family rather overplayed up the terminal illness thing, because he lingered on for quite a long time, but towards the end, yes, he was in a very bad way. I think that's fair to say.
Well, the other very successful escape, well, there were two actually, but the one that is notorious was George Blake, one of the 4 spies who escaped from Wormwood Scrubs in 1966.
So he was spying for the communists, effectively.
He was spying for the Soviet Union, yeah, post-war. The 4 of them were idealists, or they claimed to be. Of course, there were the obvious 3. And then, of course, they discovered that the curator of the Queen's pictures was the 4th. Do you remember that? It took years to root him out.
Yes.
I've forgotten the man's name now. A rather effeminate man who was the master of the Queen's pictures.
Yes.
Can you help, Keith?
I'm trying to remember. I think it began with a V. It's like Valentine or
Blunt.
Blunt. Anthony Blunt.
Yes, I knew it sounded like Valentine.
Yeah.
But Blake got to Moscow, Richard.
Sorry?
Well, Blake got to Moscow.
Yes, but he had received a very lengthy sentence in this country, hadn't he?
42 years.
And
his escape was facilitated by 2 so-called peace activists who helped him because they felt his sentence was overwhelmingly harsh.
And he got away and he got to Moscow and he lived there for the rest of his life.
Yeah, he was made hero of the Soviet Union. He was given a rank, and he died there in 2020. And I think he had a state funeral.
And the 2 activists who had facilitated his escape from the Scrubs, they were tried at the Bailey and very bizarrely got acquitted.
Well, their acquittal was bizarre, and the length of time it took to prosecute them is bizarre, because their trial was in 1992. And I can find no reason for that huge delay.
No, I've looked into that, and I don't know why that was the case. But I suppose it was just the jury thinking, well, they were just doing what they believed in.
Yes,
even though
and it was water under the bridge.
Long time ago. Who cares? The bloke's, we didn't have to pay for him because he went and lived in Moscow for the rest of his life, as opposed to paying for him to be a prison inmate. You probably did us all a favour. It may well be the reasoning there, but it's an odd little feature. Might I move on to? Go ahead.
No, please do, Richard. Go on.
No, I just wanted to move on and talk about somebody who has a Lewis connection, and that's Eamon de Oliveira, who was for a time incarcerated. And if I lean forward like that, I can see it. HMP.
Well, just Lewis. Like that.
Just like that. Just like that. Not like like that. Like that.
Just like that.
And he along with others were incarcerated in various British prisons. I think he was at Dartmoor. I think he was at Maidstone. He was at Lewes. And then he got transferred to Lincoln Prison.
He did.
And
in February 1919, he escaped.
In what are odd circumstances, aren't they, really?
Well, it was all organised by the then on-the-run, at-large Michael Collins. Of course, he and De Valera fell out badly over the Free State, which led to Collins being assassinated, basically. But that's a side issue. But at the time, Collins was the man still at liberty, organising the escape. And Dev, who was a genuinely devout Catholic, became an assistant to the priest in the prison chapel. And by using the wax from the candles, was able to make a mold for the chaplain's key to get out of the prison. Now, they were all sent out to the accomplices and were sent back in cakes. So in comes the cake with a key and a file, and 3 times that happened. Not once did the staff discover what was in these cakes. 3 times. And it was only on the 3rd time that the key worked. Valera and a couple of others just walked out of the prison onto a nearby road. I think it was called Granby Road. And at the bottom of Granby Road, yes, Richard?
No, you carry on. Tell us about your bottom.
At the bottom of Granby Road was Michael Collins in a taxi. The taxi driver had no idea who he was picking up or where he was taken to. And Dev and at least one other get in the cab, and he's driven to Worksop, to a safe house in Worksop, just across the border. Then he was moved to Sheffield and then to Manchester. And the rest, as they say, is history. So that was Dev.
It does sound as if that's another example of where there's not just outside help, but there's somebody within the prison estate, as it's called, who is helping to facilitate somebody's escape.
Well, there's no doubt that the priest was very much under suspicion.
Yes.
He was an Irishman, Catholic, Roman Catholic, and quite how De Valera had access to the key to make the blank is a moot point.
Quite.
But yeah.
Because in fact, Dev was perceived by many people at the time to be a sort of political prisoner as opposed to a criminal prisoner. And so those who...
Oh, yeah, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which was Keith knows all about this, the IRB, which was the precursor or predecessor of the IRA, they regarded themselves as political prisoners.
Yes.
And that was one of the reasons why the executions of the rebels in 16 was deemed so inflammatory.
Yes.
Because the actual rebellion wasn't generally supported in Dublin by the Dubliners themselves, but it was when the British shot them that caused absolute outrage. Yes. So there we are. But anyway. But
that
De Valera, as we know, eventually became president of Ireland.
yeah.
President of the Irish Republic.
Could I just tell you one little experience that I had? I was still in
Please
Canada
do.
when the troubles started, and the local chapter of the Provost contacted me, knowing that I was going to go and cover some stories in Dublin, and said our people there will contact you in your hotel. And I stayed in my hotel for 24 hours without any contact. Well, this will never do. I'm here to do stories. So I did what any good journalist would do: is I went downstairs, I found the nearest policeman, and I said, "Excuse me, can you tell me where I'll find the IRA?" And he said, "Yes, of course, sir." He said, "I'm not supposed to tell you." He said, "But go around the corner to 4A Kevin Street, go up the stairs, knock on the door, and they'll open up a little trap door and say who you are." So I did exactly that. And who opened the little trap door? That was Rory O'Bradar. And he said, "Oh, do come in."
Oh my goodness.
And I sat down and got a good hour with Rory O'Bradar, who then said, "You should really talk to George McStearfan, who is the nastiest piece of work that I've ever come across, and who totally and utterly refused to be interviewed. But if you want to find a terrorist, ask a policeman."
as the song has it. But
Now, in Richard Barton style, this is now a quiz question based on a true fact. But I remember this event, 1987. God, what happened?
You broke
if you
up a
want
little
to get
bit.
an escape from prison that is truly flamboyant, what happened at Gartree in 1987?
Helicopter.
Correct. The accomplices of two cons called Kendall and Draper hijacked a helicopter, landed in the exercise yard, in got Kendall and Draper, and off the helicopter flew. And I remember that as a news item in '87.
Well, you segue me, if that's the phrase I'm looking for, to
So I've done what to you? I've segued you.
Well, you've allowed me to segue anyway into a different form of.
Yes, I don't understand you, but carry on.
Phil, I bought you that children's dictionary. You ought to read it, seriously. And
well, it's a bit difficult.
I know, but it's got pictures.
It's for people. It's for people with a mental age of over 5. So I'm struggling.
Yeah. Well, and you never keep your colouring in within the lines. That's your problem. You know that, don't you?
No, I know that. That's something my wife complains about constantly.
Because a similar form of political, not quite political, but escape based upon an incarceration that's not criminal, of course, is Colditz. And those of us old enough will remember the TV series from the early 70s about it.
Hepton.
4C, yeah, all of those people. And just thinking about it, I hadn't really considered. I watched the TV series when I was younger, but thinking about it this week, I realized how foolish it was, because what the Germans did is that he said, we've got all these people in these other prisoner of war camps who keep trying to escape. Let's put them all in the same prisoner of war camp. And so it just gives them the chance to get their heads together and work out what they're going to do. But they never quite got around to using it because they got liberated. But in Colditz, the inmates had built a glider
Yep.
in the loft, and as I say, they were liberated before they could use it. But that's not dissimilar to the helicopter story in a way.
No, that's quite a nice
So
link,
the homemade
Richard.
glider is probably.
I mean, where I would mildly differ with your description is these were prisoners of war. They weren't political prisoners.
Phil, you're
These are
going
prisoners
Norman
of war.
Collier again.
Yeah. Could I give you another little vignette about Colditz?
Please do.
As a young boy, I was reading in the same room as my grandfather the Colditz story. And I made some reference to Colditz. And he said, "Oh, yes, I was a prisoner in Colditz." And I said, "Grandfather, you couldn't be. You were in the First World War." "Yes," he said, "we were held. They held prisoners in the First World War in Colditz as well," which I didn't know at that point.
I didn't know.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. Obviously, you know that Douglas Bader was in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
without his legs.
Well, his widow came to my school to dish out the certificates, and I didn't quite do it, but I we were 18. I'd had a drink with my friends, and they bet me that I wouldn't, when I went up to see her, say, "Do you know what, Lady Bader? Like your husband, I'm completely legless." I didn't.
Legless. Yeah, all right. Well, I can trump you, Richard, because at my school, because I'm 10 years older than you, in the second year, there was I in my nifty little black blazer with yellow braid at Stockport Grammar School, and in walked Douglas Bader. Because one of the sponsors of the grammar school was somebody he flew with in the Second World War and had founded a foundation, the Cheshire Foundations, and Bader was a guest of honour. And you could have heard a pin drop. He was speaking to almost the whole school of boys. Extraordinary experience.
I'm sure.
Now, we've concentrated, haven't we, on UK escapes. But
well, let me just deal with one other one, if I may, on this a similar theme to Colditz, and this is Stalag Luft 3, a prisoner of war camp for people who worked, as the name suggests, in the Air Force. And Peter Butterworth.
Oh, yeah.
He was an actor.
Carry on.
He was in 16 Carry On films. He had a bit of a underbite like that. And in fact, oddly enough, was married to Janet Brown, who used to do the Margaret Thatcher impressions.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good heavens.
And they're buried together in Dane Hill, which is just sort of, you could walk directly north from Lewes, and it's a village there. So he was a prisoner of war there. And that's where he met Talbot Rothwell, who was the bloke who wrote most of the Carry On films. And they, in fact, had a little double act they did in the prison. And they did it deliberately badly, so the other prisoners would boo and hiss them. So the German guards wouldn't hear the escape tunnel being dug underneath.
Yep.
And the other thing that happened there, which many people will know about, is that that's where the wooden horse escape took place, where a gym horse was brought out every day by prisoners, and people would do their gymnastics over it, jumping over it and whatever, because there would be two people inside the horse who would scrape the ground back where they were digging the hole and then go down and do that. And Peter Butterworth was one of the people who did the vaulting of the gym horse. Now, the odd feature of that is that in due course, after the war, there was a film made, of course, called The Wooden Horse.
There was.
And he applied to be an actor in that. And the casting director came back and said he didn't look suitably heroic or athletic for the role. Now, he's the bloke who actually did it, for heaven's sake, in real life. You know, it's a bit harsh, isn't it, when you can't play yourself in a film?
It's a very harsh point, that is. Did the director relent or not?
No, he wasn't in the film. He was in lots of, apart from the Carry-Ons, he was in lots of other excellent films, in fact. Much underrated. But because of Talbot Rothwell, who went on to write the Carry-On films, that's how he got his start there. And as I said, he did 16 of those films and was always, for example, his character in Carry-On Camping, Mr. Fiddler, who owns the campsite.
Oh, God, yeah.
Is just a joy to watch. He plays it, his timing was great, everything like that. But yeah, so it's an odd little feature of him, because you see him in the Carry-On films, you see him in other things, and you think, yeah, you're a jobbing actor. But in fact, he was a brave fellow in the war as well, as I'm sure lots of others were. But anyway, Phil, sorry.
But just not heroic enough to play himself.
Just not not sufficiently heroic or athletic looking to play himself.
You've seen the film with Clint called Escape from Alcatraz.
Yes.
Not a British escape, but the only successful escape from Alcatraz because Alcatraz was used like Colditz. Alcatraz was where serial escapers were kept. It held it held all sorts of people.
Just so there may be some people who don't know, part of the reason why it was used in that way was because of the geography, as I understand it.
It was known as the Rock. It was a separate rock in San Francisco Bay. It was the furthest away from the mainland. In between the mainland was another island called Angel Island, which again was just a piece of rock. And the currents in the bay were so strong that people would just drown. So it was deemed to be inescapable from, successfully anyway. Frank Morris. Go ahead, Richard.
No, I was just saying that sort of resonates to a certain extent with some of the prisons in this country. So there are 3 prisons on the Isle of Wight, and there are 3 prisons on the Isle of Sheppey. And the reason they're there is because if somebody gets out, they're going to have an awfully tricky time getting onto the mainland. So that, they're deliberately placed in such locations.
Chaps, we begin to run out of time.
I mean,
These stories are quite fascinating, actually. and I wouldn't mind if on Friday you started off with one or two more of these stories. But I wonder if I could leave today's session with a story going back to Douglas Bader. When I worked in Vancouver, I had working for me an old Scot who was a pain in the bum because he claimed to know absolutely everybody. And he would often talk about his wartime exploits with Douglas Bader. And Bader came out to Vancouver, and everybody who had listened to Dougie thought, aha, we've got him. And we all went out to meet Bader at the airport. And Bader got off the plane, looked, saw this old Scot, rushed over to him and said, Bobby, how are you? Whose bluff was called? Gentlemen,
Quite so. I mean, Keith can.
Yes, go ahead.
I just thought this pain in the bum Scott is a complete tautology.
Indeed, maybe.
With all due respect to Beth. So, would you like to call it a day now?
I think actually, believe it or not, we've been going for 55 minutes. And when the conversation is fascinating, of course, the time goes very, very quickly. And I think that we inadvertently, because of the Lewis prison, went down a different road, and a very interesting road. So it's been a very, very good program. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think that our joint memories have given us and our viewers an insight into an awful lot of things, not only crime, but also incarceration during the war. But we do have some.
Well,
Yes, go ahead, Phil.
Well, my clock is showing 48 minutes, 30 seconds. And I just thought this, if I could just finish with this is a poem that was left by a bloke called Ruby Sparks, who escaped from Strangeways in Manchester. He was a safebreaker. And he left a poem in his cell, which read as this: "The cage is empty, the bird has flown. I've gone to a place where I'm better known." I thought that was quite funny.
Yes.
Right.
Richard.
Obviously, I'm the only one.
I've got nothing else to add.
Sorry, Keith.
No, I'm just asking Richard if he had any last words.
No, thank you. Hope to see you on Friday.
Bethany has sat listening to all this. Anything to say to the boys?
No, just I've always been really interested in like the escaping stories and all the prisoner kind of mindsets and how they would get away with that. So it was really good to know quite a few that's not been dramatized by movies.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed it, Beth. And we'll see you on Friday.
Definitely.
You're looking
All right.
amused, Richard.
Bye.
Yeah, I'm away, Keith.
Okay. I'll see you on Friday.
See you Friday.
Okay. Bye. Well, that was fascinating. You sat very quietly there, but some interesting stories.
Yeah, there really was.
All right. Well, we're going to Harry Atherton pretty soon, but I think we'll take a very quick break so that we can prepare for Harry. I found that a very interesting session, and I'm sure that many people will have done so. So shall we? We'll say toodle pip and we'll be back in a very short period of time. Are you okay for time?
Yeah.
Okie dokie. Well, Bethan will be back with me in a moment. For a moment, toodle pip. Say toodle pip.
Toodle pip for now.